AI doesn't scare me. And I do not buy into the trope that AI is going to be the death of marketing agencies or the marketer. We are a power user of DOJO, so I want to talk about our experience and then, of course, share more about how we work at Refine Labs and what we're all about. You have to play by the rules of the system that you're in while you're figuring out how you're going to change how the system operates.
Welcome to the Growth Dojo, the podcast for marketers who think differently. Hosted by me, Luke Osley-White from DOJO AI. This show is your training ground for unconventional marketing tactics, honest agency conversations, and the real career journeys of top CMOs.
You build a machine to capture buyers who are already searching, Google Ads, intent data, gated content, follow-up sequences, and it works for a while. And then the pipeline dries up and nobody can really explain why. Here's what's happening. You've been fishing in the 3 to 5% of your market that's actually in market right now. The other 95% are making buying decisions in Slack channels, in conference hallways, in conversations your CRM will never see. And that's the dark funnel. And most agencies won't tell you this because demand capture is far easier to measure and demand creation is not. I'm here with Megan Bowen, CEO and majority owner of Refine Labs, one of the few B2B agencies that's built its entire model around this problem. We're covering why the attribution data your board is looking at is probably lying to you, how the brand, demand, expand framework works in practice, and what actually happened at Refine Labs during the 2022-2023 B2B market contraction, and how Megan went from joining the company in customer success to actually running and owning the whole thing. If your demand gen motion has plateaued and you don't know why, this one's for you. Megan, thanks so much for joining me and Duarte on the podcast today. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me. What an intro. Made me sound mysterious and exciting. I loved it. Excited to get into it. We got a lot of different avenues to cover today, so it'll be a good conversation.
Megan, for the guests listening in, what are they going to hear about today?
Well, I know that you guys were very interested in hearing more inside details about the whole Refine Labs journey. So we'll, definitely willing and open to share about the very early days, and the highs and the lows over the last 6 years. Of course, we can't avoid touching on AI, but I'm excited to share my point of view, which might be a little bit different than some of the LinkedIn hype that you see. And then certainly getting into some, really tactical topics. I love you guys. We are a power user of DOJO. So I want to talk about our experience and then, of course, share more about, how we work at Refine Labs and, what we're all about. And so excited to dig into those topics and take some fun tangents as we go.
So let's start at the beginning. You didn't start Refine Labs. You came in through customer success. You worked your way up to COO and eventually becoming the majority owner and the CEO. That's not how agency leadership usually works for a lot of companies. What did you see from the inside that made you decide this company was worth owning and that you were the right person to lead it?
Yeah, a fun question. Let me kind of take you back to when Chris Walker, the founder, and I first met and kind of how I ended up joining to begin with. And so back in 2019, both Chris and I, without knowing each other, both started our LinkedIn content creator journey. And so he was posting about marketing. At the time, I was actually the COO of a company called Managed by Q. Honestly, I was doing it as a way to start to recruit people because we were hiring a lot. And so that was my initial reason for posting. We kind of started liking each other's content. Chris reached out one day. This was in 2019 and was like, hey, let's record a podcast on Zoom. And I was like, all right, I haven't really done that. I've done conference speaking and live panels, but I was like, let's give it a shot. So we recorded some content together and then he was coming to New York in February 2020. Hey, I have a camera crew. Let's do a sit down interview. I was like, all right, why not? He was coming to me. I just had to show up. So we did this interview. It was fun. And at the time, actually, Managed by Q had been acquired by WeWork. So I had an exit there and I had moved into this other company called Platters. I was in the Grubhub Seamless B2B food tech space for a long time. So I kind of went back into that space because there was a lot of interesting opportunity. Anyway, COVID happens. That business goes to zero overnight. I was kind of like, I signed up for a very specific reason to like exit this company. Like, I'm going to peace out, guys. I got my WeWork money and I was going to start my own agency, like my own consultancy. That was my plan. And Chris and I had developed this friendship. And then he had reached out to me in the summer of 2020 and was like, hey, I think we should catch up. I have something to talk with you about. And then in my head, I was like, oh, this guy's like trying to start his own agency. I was like, I can kind of talk to him and kind of get his perspective on his journey. Cause I was basically like, I want to do that myself. We get on the call and he's basically like, you should come work with me at Refined Labs. Like, be my business partner. Let's do this. And I was like, whoa, that's not what I was expecting. Like, actually, I think I'm going to do my own thing. And I was like, I'm not a marketer. I was like, you don't want me at your agency. Like, go find a marketer. He's like, no, I want someone with customer success experience and I want like an operator. And we talked about it for a long time. I was not initially gonna do it. And he's very, very persuasive. And so he convinced me and said, let's give it a try. At the time though, there was like 5 employees, there was like 6 customers, under $1 million in revenue. There wasn't much going on yet, right? And this was in early 2020. So he was starting to get some traction, but he like wasn't a LinkedIn celebrity yet, right? So we get started and basically in the first like 90 days, all the customers canceled. And I was like, what's happening? Like, what's going on? I closed my first deal on my 3rd week. So, jumped in, started selling, doing whatever was needed in terms of managing the team, hiring, servicing customers. In 2021, we really got steam and we formalized our offer. We raised our prices. We started converting and retaining customers in a really steady manner. So despite kind of any early stage company, there's always a lot of volatility and uncertainty, right? That's kind of what you're signing up for. So I think being able to kind of turn what started into a real business that had traction, I was like, okay, here we go. And then in our early days of working together, Chris and I were a great team, and he had sort of set the expectation. I want us to actually be business partners. I want us to this is going to be our agency, because he knew I wanted to start my own. And he's like, instead of that, let's team up and have it be ours. You can have a lot of influence on how we build this agency. So ultimately by March of 2021, we officially became business partners. I actually bought in for an ownership stake in the agency. And him and I were like, all right, we're going to do this. We're going to figure out how to scale this agency. We had insane growth in 2021 and the first half of 2022. Things kind of hit the fan in 22 and 23. And I think we'll come back to that because you want to touch on that particular period. By late 2023, Chris had decided he was really interested in starting a different business. And so we just had a candid conversation, and he said, I'm going to go do this other thing. And I was like, okay, I will take over as CEO and keep things going. Negotiated some additional equity since I was going to be running the business on my own without his day-to-day involvement. And then sort of unexpected on my side, but the beginning of 2025, he reached out and said, I think you should buy me out and take the agency. And I wasn't expecting it, but I saw it as an opportunity, and I was able to figure out a way to get him the price he wanted and bring in another financial investor and make it make sense for all three parties involved. So that was the high level journey in terms of how I started from day one to how I end up, here. Happy to dig into any of the moments, but that's the high level timeline.
It's so cool because I witnessed all of this as a bystander, and obviously within LinkedIn, followed Chris from the beginning, took a lot of inspiration from him in many ways when starting my own business, and then watched as Refine Labs grew into something much bigger after he left and when you stepped in. I'm really interested about that crucible moment in, I believe, 2020, when things weren't going well at all, but then something happened and you started selling a lot, and then that success lasted for another 3 years at least. And what happened there? What was the reason for And I know all about volatility and uncertainty when building something from scratch. So I kind of have like 20 different reasons why that would have happened, but I'm interested to understand in this case what that was.
Yeah. So in the beginning, and I think this is true for almost all service businesses, Chris was just selling whatever he could sell. So the majority of the customers were just like, I want to do what you're doing on LinkedIn. So a lot of the initial services that we were selling were essentially like LinkedIn thought leadership, right? It was like, oh, we can help you create a podcast or create content and then show you how to post it within your profile to get business. That's a really tough business to scale in terms of ongoing services. We then had a few customers that were also spending some money on paid advertising. And we said, well, we could also do that too for you as well. We had one particular customer, and they have a big case study on our website, so I can share the name, Vena Solutions, which is like a financial software company, software solutions for like FP&A, professional CFOs, that sort of thing. And Vena ended up essentially being like the early flagship customer. And in our work with Vena, we were not really helping them with LinkedIn thought leadership. We took on more and more of their paid management. We then got into their CRM and started helping with the actual reporting and measurement of our marketing programs, connected back to pipeline and revenue. In working with Vena in those early days, that's when we kind of uncovered this split the funnel methodology of like how to think about breaking the funnel into higher intent and lower intent. And that was really the turning point. Chris and I were realizing as we were working with Vena and kind of figuring this out, we were like, this is it. This is why people would hire us over another person. It's not because of LinkedIn thought leadership, which we were really struggling with pricing that appropriately and just retaining customers for more than 6 months on that particular service. So once we clarified that like managing paid programs and then bringing this new approach to measurement was, number one, something that we could translate into multi-year retainers, and number two, also held essentially our differentiation, right? Of like, why us over another agency. And so it was kind of crazy because like at first, I think when I joined, our average contract value was like 8,000 per month. And over like from mid 2020 to like mid 2022, our prices just dramatically started to increase as we were more formally productizing the services. So we went from 8K to 12K, 12K to 18K, 18K to 25K. We started separating out demand strategy and reporting, paid advertising. We added creative services by mid 2021, and we could just keep charging more and more money. And then, I like to say Chris and I, we're both smart in our own right, but we're not geniuses. The external market conditions absolutely buoyed the business, right? There was like massive, I call it the COVID boom. Digital marketing was like the only form of marketing that mattered in this period of time where everything was online. The VC injection into the SaaS ecosystem was massive. We were telling clients to not spend as much on paid advertising, and they're like, we don't care, spend it anyway, right? It was just a very interesting time. It was like, all right, well, then I'm going to charge you more money to spend to manage a bigger budget, right? So we were just on this like insane upward trajectory. Honestly, you mentioned, I think when we were doing our pre-chat, how recruiting can be challenging as you're trying to scale. That was our biggest bottleneck. And so I essentially developed like an employer branding strategy, which is not too different from our marketing strategy. Started the Talent Destination podcast and just built this like ridiculous hiring machine to just grab like all of the best B2B marketing talent that existed and get them to come work for us. We hired, 100 people probably within like 10 months. It was insane. And then, like all good stories, we had a meteoric rise and then an epic fall in the late 2022. We can talk about that next if you want.
Yeah, I mean, that was a period where everyone was freezing their budgets. Everyone was like, oh my God, there's a recession. This is it. This is the end. Like the good times are done. Most agencies started that the growth wasn't bulletproof and their clients weren't either. What was the decision that you think actually managed to turn that around? So you have this you've seen this double dip. We talked a little bit about the first resolution. What was the main thing behind the second?
I mean, there was a lot of things that happened. So, number one, all of our customers essentially, after going through this massive like budget expansion, went through this very rapid contraction. I mean, we had clients that just ran out of money, and obviously couldn't pay us anymore. So, we had this insane revenue, growth. And then basically over like a 6-month period, we just lost over half of our customers. Outright cancellations, it was a trickle down effect. There was like an immediate segment that was hit the hardest, and then it just kind of kept happening over time. And so this really started in, I would say, like May 2022 is when we started seeing some of the early signals. We had to do 2 layoffs in 2022. We did our first in July. We didn't go deep enough, so we had to do a second one in December. And essentially just right sizing our team to the customers that we had, right? I think we hired 40 people in Q1 of 2022 and had to get rid of probably almost all of those folks over the course of the year across those 2 layoffs. So that was brutal. There was just, we were bootstrapped. We did get some debt in order to fund the building of the vault. We used some of that debt to pay severance for the people that were impacted, but we had limited funds. So like any agency, many agencies I think had to go through that. That was brutal though. Massive hit to the culture. So I'm basically trying to like keep us afloat, make these decisions, manage through these changes, like keep the clients we have, keep the team that we have. And Chris was trying to figure out, he really believed that we needed to become a different type of agency, that we essentially needed to pivot away from the set of services that we had been delivering and like reinvent the business. And so we went through this like interesting period of experimentation. The end of 2022, he released this concept to the market called revenue R&D. And the idea that we would turn into more of a kind of like consultancy firm, less of a dependency on paid execution, still a focus on measurement and doing marketing in the right way, but kind of like a different flavor, I guess. And so we really tried to go to market and sell this kind of updated service. Essentially, though, the market rejected it. We had 2 salespeople at the time. I was sort of involved of like keeping like the current machine like going to keep us alive. And Chris was trying to like figure out the next thing. That's how we like divided and conquered. At one point, I think we went like 6 months without making a sale. And I kind of was like, hey man, like we need more money coming in. I can only do so much over here. I was like, I'm going to jump back in. I'm like, I can sell some stuff. And I'm like, let me figure out what's happening, like what's going on with the market. So I jumped back into sales in Q1 of 2023. And I think what I quickly realized is we can definitely keep selling what we've been selling, but we need to really narrow in on the right type of customer that can afford us and that will not go out of business. So like I was looking at later stage companies, and I was also anchoring on where can we start to get more confident in terms of like the guarantee or the offer, like what can we really be producing? And so the key for me over the course of 2023 was, if we work with mid-market and enterprise companies, based on our track record, when I looked at all of our customers and just segmented those, I was like, man, for almost all of these customers, we are driving a 50% increase to qualified pipeline within 8 months of working together. I'm like, that is real. I'm like, if these conditions exist, we can definitely do this for companies. And so it became this exercise of like, let's get really clear on who we can help and essentially offer the same thing that we were doing before, maybe slightly packaged up a little bit differently. So I was going through this in 2023 and basically figuring out how we could keep the business going and some of these key strategic adjustments we needed to make to be successful. And then Chris was essentially developing what is now Paceto, which is this other company that he set up. And so by the end of 2023, we kind of came back together and I was like, okay, like I got us back on track. Like, I can keep selling stuff. Like, we can keep going. And then he was like, I kind of want to do this. And I was like, okay, but we kind of like tried to reposition the company. It didn't work. Like, we have all these people, like I think we can do this. And then we kind of realized we're like, it's a different company. Like what he's trying to do is a bit of a different company. There is certainly some overlap and there's a lot of philosophical alignment between both. And so that's when we kind of said, okay, like maybe the move is to just make it its own thing. And then that was what we decided at the end of 2023. So Chris is like, I'm going to go start Paceto. He's like, I'm going to take a couple of Refine Labs people with me and we're going to go do this. And then you'll become CEO of Refine Labs. You keep running Refine Labs. So that was kind of what was happening behind the scenes in 2023 and then ultimately resulted in him announcing Paceto and then me taking over as CEO in 2024. But managing the layoffs was brutal. And then essentially it was this like kind of search for getting product market fit again and like uncovering those very specific things. And honestly, that those same decisions have what carried us through to success even to this day, right? And we've continued to evolve our services, but like the ICP and leaning into like our area of expertise in hindsight, I think was the right move for the Refine Labs agency itself.
It's fantastic how so much of that is the story of a tech startup and not necessarily a services business. It's the founder mode angle, how you brought the company back up by taking the reins on sales and never really letting go since then. Even though you obviously put an extreme focus on hiring the right people. I know your team. It's amazing. It's really incredible, the team of superstars you've hired. But you still run most of the sales, right?
I do. I just hired a director of sales. She started in January. So we're ramping her up. I'm very excited. But basically from 2023 until a month ago, I was the only person doing sales, which as a CEO is a little too risky. Also doesn't really allow for proper time off. And so I don't believe a CEO should actually ever be fully out of sales, but I'm very excited. We have a director of sales. She's doing awesome so far, getting her ramped up. And the goal would be that she drives a lot of it while I remain involved where it's most impactful in the process. But yeah, it was like almost 3 years of me doing sales on my own.
I feel you.
A lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. At DOJO, I think we had to reach 100 sales before we decided to hire someone, but I'm now on that path as well. But much like you, I don't think I'll ever let go of it. It doesn't make sense to. You never really get a better sense of whether or not what you're doing is right unless you're speaking to prospects every day and you're testing your positioning and your value proposition directly with people and not just listening to reports of middle management on what is and isn't working. So I really respect that.
I 100% agree. Yeah.
And one really interesting thing for me as well is to look at the history of Refine Labs through the lens of obviously really big moments in time like COVID, but also the reinvention of what it means to be a marketing agency. And right now, I feel like we're at another such moment in time where you're probably being forced to, again, take one step back and rethink what brought me here, bring me to the next stage of our evolution, or do I need to reinvent what the marketing agency should be now? And I'd love to hear your thoughts, your take on what you think is happening right now and how you're adapting Refine Labs to not just survive through this fundamental AI change that we're all witnessing, but actually thrive.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in the business game a long time, and I think similar to the story that I just told you and just identifying a couple of small strategic adjustments that really were the difference between living and dying, I honestly think the same thing applies to this situation. So it's so interesting, and maybe I'm being naive, but I don't feel like I am. AI doesn't scare me. And I do not buy into the trope that AI is going to be the death of marketing agencies or the marketer. It's like the people that are saying those things have something to financially gain by you believing that at the end of the day. And so one of the reasons why you've heard me and our company start to talk about this concept of brand demand expand is really rooted in what I think is required to survive and thrive in this AI era. So the number one thing is, while everybody else is abandoning fundamentals for the shiny new objects, we will never abandon the fundamentals. And number two, there are probably just a handful of very impactful ways to leverage this technology, and the rest is noise. And number three, there are going to be things that humans can do that machines cannot. And as long as I protect and build and bolster those human capabilities, then we'll be fine. And so those are the three things that I'm betting on, essentially. So the brand demand expand framework, like, we didn't make that up. Refine Labs is known for coining terms and building movements. And I love that stuff, honestly, but that's definitely a bit more of a Chris Walker flavor. I'm more of a realist, more practical. Brand demand expand is something that is just representative of core business fundamentals. And so that is my kind of public declaration in terms of us anchoring on that as an agency, and that being the most important thing. You could be super sophisticated with AI, but if you don't know who your customer is, you don't know how to reach the customer, none of that actually matters, right? So that's critical. Number two is being really intentional with how we think AI can actually help. And I think there's two guiding lights that I have. Number one, is there a way we can leverage AI that can improve our internal operations, right? That can make us more efficient, that can make my team's life easier. I want that if that's the case. And then number two, how can we actually use it in a way that drives a better customer experience for our customer? I remember when we first met, and I really loved the vision that you had communicated to me and what you were trying to build. And you basically hit on those two things that I said were going to be the most important requirements for me in terms of leveraging any particular AI tool. And so, probably one of our power users at Refine Labs of your software is Malin. I know that I think you've met him and spoken with him. He has a great story about using it with one of our clients, where we had this very surprising drop in terms of meeting conversions on Google, which we were not expecting based on what we were doing and how we were managing the account. He was essentially able to use your tool to get a whole suite of different insights, and then apply his human judgment to all of the potential variables that could have impacted performance, and actually get to root cause. And in his words, days before he would have had to go through a more manual effort in terms of identifying possible issues and then eliminating ones before he actually found what the actual cause was, right? And so what I love about your tool is it's very powerful and it can do a lot. But when you couple your tool with a really smart marketer, that's when things really start to happen, right? And so, we're hoping, actually, we're running an experiment in this year. If we, have someone use DOJO for their full book of business, can they manage one extra customer because of the efficiencies that are provided, right? Similarly, man, our customer was so impressed with Malin. He comes back within 48 hours. Hey, I diagnosed this issue. This is, I think, the solution. If you're on board, I'm going to implement this now. And within a week, we saw a turnaround of the particular performance, issue that we were dealing with. And so everything from improving our internal operations to driving a better customer experience and customer outcome. So I'm not going crazy with forcing AI into everything that we're doing. We're being very intentional and strategic. And that's the bet I'm making. I think that instead of chasing every shiny object and building a bunch of things that break down, just being really intentional with the tools that you integrate and whether you build, buy, or partner, right, is the right approach there. And then the human element. I think that I don't know. I think that it's going to really matter. I think that working with people who have experience and judgment and are willing to have conviction in their recommendations, I think it's going to be a long time before people are going to be comfortable outsourcing all of that to machines. I could be wrong, but that's my bet.
I don't think you are. I think I'm fully aligned. One thing that I've witnessed, the best results and the happiest customers are usually the best marketers as well. There's a parallel there because you use the right word to describe it. It's a tool. And sometimes we forget that when it comes to AI. We forget AI is a tool. It is a tool, not a god, just a tool, a really powerful tool that will change how we work.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
I fully agree with you. And I've had some very heated debates on LinkedIn, which I've stopped doing, by the way, on very cautious advice from my co-founder on how AI will actually not replace human creativity and critical thinking, but particularly the creativity angle. I think it's essential. And the fact that you've got the clarity to look at that and go all in as an agency, I think is going to be what distinguishes you from everyone else in the next few years. I really do believe that.
I do too. I've been working since I took over, since the buyout closed in the summer of 25, and I've always felt a sense of ownership, but it definitely ratcheted up a few notches when it was true financially and on paper. I've been spending a lot of time working on what I call our vivid vision. And I talk about this a lot in terms of how I see this panning out over the next 3 years. We actually just had our company offsite last week in LA, and I presented the vivid vision to the company, and we're going to be doing a public release soon as well, but touch on a lot of this and how I see things playing out. There are certain, like, I've learned that I have this like very strong inner knowing when it comes to really important things, and I don't like to be arrogant or overconfident, but I just know it's going to be true. I just know it's true. So I don't like to come off too too overconfident, but that's how I feel.
I get it. I respect that a lot. Instinct is such a fundamental part because if you listen to yourself, you kind of know what's right and wrong. And I trust it. I've learned to trust it. So yeah, I respect that.
Yeah, I think one interesting part for me, Megan, is also that it's not just trusting yourself, right? You mentioned a few times there about the importance of your team as well, the people that you've put around you. So it's not just, okay, I trust my own instinct, but I trust the instinct of the great people that I've been able to find and building this engine. And you have your leadership philosophy that I've read a few of your posts around like people success equals customer success equals business success. Challenge for me with those type of frameworks is always that it's easy to say those things when things are going well, right? Like, look, everything's great, my philosophy is working, but it's tough when you're going through those difficult periods that you mentioned a few of. What does it actually look like, that philosophy, when it's hard to live by? When there's real pressure on the business and you have to make a call that doesn't feel good for the team?
Yeah, absolutely. I can give you a few examples of this. And I would say I think over the 6 years at Refine Labs, I think maybe 2 were good and easy, hard in a different way, and 4 were very difficult. So a lot of examples that I can share. So, I can go straight to even our layoffs, right? This was a tough decision. We spent over $1 million in severance in 2022, and basically from the debt facility that we took. Now, arguably, it would have been totally appropriate for us to not provide much severance. We did 6-week severance to every impacted person. We could have done 2 weeks. We could have done none. From a business perspective, the answer would have been, 0 to 2 weeks. But we had just hired these people. Like, I couldn't do it. And in my mind, I was like, I'll make $1 million back. And this is the right thing to do, especially in this really crazy market where people don't know what is going to happen, right? And we tried to time things so that they would have health insurance for a period of time post the termination date so that they could figure out their next thing. We also put a lot of energy into placement support, referrals. I still keep in touch with lots of people that we had to let go. Some people have come back. So I think like in my mind, that was so important for the people that were leaving, but also for the people that were staying in terms of how we're treating the people that we have to say goodbye to, right? Now, that said, we had major culture fracture, and it took probably 12 to 18 months to actually repair the culture. But I think that's a good example. Another example, I've fired clients before. We've had clients that are, disrespectful to the team. And despite even being a high paying, retainer customer, basically having my team's back. And when I determined that there was really no way to turn the situation around, basically, turn revenue away to protect the team that we have. When you're an agency, your people are your product, right? And I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but like your people are what your customers are buying from you essentially, right? The talent and that human judgment. I think another example, I took over as owner in the summer of last year, and there were a bunch of things that I knew we needed to do as an agency, and I just wasn't able to make those happen under the prior ownership structure. And so I spent 6 months investing back in the agency, reinvesting profits in terms of hiring, tools, all sorts of things. And that impacted my bottom line in the back half of the year significantly. But I knew that if I made those investments that I would get the return that I was looking for. And I also had to find a new partner and an investor who was on board with this philosophy and making these types of decisions. And so those are a few examples. Hopefully they kind of paint some clarity around like real decision making that is aligned with that approach.
I love that. And I think that's a really challenging part that we've heard from a few of the agencies that we've spoken to in this series is as this kind of challenger agency phenomena emerges, the ability to, treat your team the same way that a startup company would treat their team. The people that are working in the agency are no different to those employees. They're not disposable assets. And so I think that idea of picking the right clients, not just for the ICP in terms of are they big enough to pay our bills, but also what are they going to be like to work with has been really interesting for me. And one of the questions that I've asked a couple of our guests already, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on, is do you have any kind of framework you use? Because as you said, you were doing the sales for the last period. Is there any kind of framework you use to decide, is this going to be a red flag customer? Do we not want to work with them even though they fit our financial ICP? Do you have anything like that you could share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So in our sales process, there's a few qualification layers. There's kind of like the basic qualification in terms of like, do I believe we can drive successful results for your company, right? And frankly, that's number one, because if we can't meet that criteria, you shouldn't be our customer. I don't want to hire customers that I can't drive outcomes for, right? Or acquire. So that's sort of number one. Number two is I am very transparent and explicit of this is how we work as an agency. This is how often we're going to meet. This is how often you'll get reporting. This is how often we'll communicate. This is how our team is structured in terms of other clients that they're managing. Here's what you can expect in terms of turnaround times. If, we're not seeing results, here are the steps that we take to diagnose what's wrong. Basically, in going through how we actually work is where I can typically uncover red flags. Oh, I need a 3-hour SLA for Slack messages. Like, why? Like, we're just doing some marketing. We're not curing cancer here. So different types of questions can come up, or, oh, I think we're going to need to meet X times per week. Well, we could accommodate that, but the price would go up. No, I don't think I should spend more on that. And so just going through the practicalities of what the actual engagement will look like is honestly the best way to surface red flags in terms of clients that will be overly demanding. I'm a pretty good judge of character. So, I have like, a no asshole rule. But sometimes they sneak in. And then you have to just take care of it after the fact. So
I'm going to take advantage of your instinct now and ask you about changes that you see coming. And now less on the sort of AI or agency front, but talking about marketing and talking about specifically B2B demand gen, outbound versus inbound, founder-led, brand-led, paid media. What do you see as the big changes that we should all be preparing for, if not already here?
Yeah. So it's so interesting, and I'll give some credit to Chris Walker on this. When he brought me in at the beginning, and I my background was customer success, and I was like, I'm not a marketer. I'm like a customer success person. He would constantly tell me, he was like, customer success is marketing. He's like, it is marketing. And so I'll give credit where credit is due, but I really believe that. So I think in terms of how things are going to evolve, the businesses that are going to be successful are actually going to deeply understand their customers' pains, needs, and wants. They're going to deliver a product or service that meets and exceeds those needs consistently on an ongoing basis. And they're going to be really good about how they go to market with those facts, essentially. And those ladder up, nice and cleanly into the brand demand expand framework. I think we're in a situation now where you can't have a mediocre SaaS company that delivers mediocre outcomes and survive. You won't. You will die. It's like survival of the fittest. And so I think it really comes back to the customer experience and the customer outcome. And from a marketing perspective and a demand gen perspective, this is where we've been very demand focused for a lot of our history. It's why we're leaning more into brand programs and supporting different brand programs, and also leaning much more into customer marketing, which essentially is evangelizing use cases, fueling word of mouth, right? Ensuring retention and cross-sell and upsell. And so when you look at those three pillars, demand is just going to become more expensive, less efficient, more noisy, and the people that win are going to be focusing on these other two pillars, which was another reason why I wanted to expand our purview in terms of the services that we're providing and the philosophy that we're communicating. Demand is still important, and in many ways, it can pay the bills this month and this quarter, but these other elements are going to be required for longer term success. So I think that's the biggest shift that we're going to see from just a marketing perspective and companies that are able to succeed versus those that fail.
It's actually scary how much we're aligned. I don't know if you know this, but we, and I know Luke is already smiling because he knows what I'm going to say. We actually, customer success and marketing, a joint function at DOJO. We are in a very blessed place right now. I don't know how much it's going to last for. You never know. But we have a very healthy inbound funnel, especially for a company that's a year and a half, right, old. And the reason why, we don't do outbound, we don't do cold outbound, we don't do mass outbound. And yes, having a great product with very strong product market fit is the start of it. But also, we created a role that we called the growth sensei to fit the DOJO vibe. And Luke is it, right? And it is a marketer, a consultative marketer that basically nurtures pilots, so does customer success, ensures people are using the product successfully, that they're happy, turns them into advocates, turns them into customer stories, into guest blog posts, into LinkedIn posts, into Substacks, into podcast guests, as exemplified here. And that then feeds into our brand and into our demand. And it just works, and it works really well. And listening to you say that you saw this coming such a long time ago, the merger between customer success and marketing, because we stumbled upon it, if we can be honest. It just happened to us and we took it. But you had that foresight, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's I love that you're doing that. I think you guys are a perfect example of a software company taking that approach. I think what's going to be really challenging is a lot of our customers are much larger, anywhere from 100 million in annual revenue to a billion in annual revenue. And one of the things that I'm passionate about is I think we can help our customers like make the necessary shifts and changes. And so like a big thing I'm talking a lot about right now is really the concept of change management and like how difficult it is to change a system when you're operating within a system versus operating outside of the system. And I've been a part of a lot of different like turnaround stories over the course of my career. So I know that it's possible, but it's challenging. But these companies have, you know, a lot of revenue, a lot of capital, and if they have the desire to change and they find the right people to help them change, they can definitely evolve. And so that's where I see an interesting opportunity for us as we continue to play in this particular space in the market.
It's essentially like you could have taken the easy path, right? Like some of the things that you identified early on, like you guys are great at doing paid advertising, all of these different channels. You could have gone down the easy path of we'll just add 10% extra to the company, right? We'll just take what they're doing and do it a little bit better. And a lot of the bad rep that agencies get is because basically they do that. They just do the easy options. You're doing something that's going to genuinely upset a lot of companies, right? So you're basically saying, no, we're actually not going to do the thing of we're going to prove ROI in the first 30 days. We're not going to be able to do something that's going to be identifiable immediately in your CRM. You're doing something where they actively have to change also their measurement in order to be able to understand that it's working. As you said, this is such an important part of you going forward. Imagine you're making that case to a CMO. Like, how do you do that journey to justify the budget to the board, et cetera, that whole piece?
Yeah. So we've done this a lot, and I've done this both like as an operator within a company and then also, you know, as an agency helping customers. The truth is, to make the type of change that we're discussing, you have to do both. You have to play by the rules of the system that you're in while you're figuring out how you're going to change how the system operates. If you only focus on championing the change without acknowledging the pressures, the incentives, the goals, the constraints of the current system, it's just not going to work. And so essentially what we aim to do is we say, okay, what are the rules of this game? How do you guys play the game, right? Oh, you know, I'll give you a typical client example. You just report on last touch attribution in the board meetings. That's all they care about, right? That's what the C team and the board care about. That's the constraint and the rule of the game that is being played today. Okay, got it. So we need to make sure that in the interim, while we're working on a game plan to get the buy-in that we need for change, that those metrics are looking healthy to a degree. What I try to do is we actually do try to get some quick wins within the first 90 days. Honestly, which almost always anchors on efficiency with demand capture. Almost every company overspends on this particular channel. So you can very quickly show them how they can spend anywhere from 25 to 40% less on that channel and drive the same or better results. That creates instant credibility within that initial time frame. While you're aligning to whatever the metrics are that are being reported on, at the same time, you are understanding the other aspects of the business and identifying what the change management approach must be. So a typical example could be, we'll measure last touch attribution, but let's also bring in some other measurements. Let's look at your share of branded search over time. Let's get some inputs in terms of total marketing cost and investment. And let's look at your total pipeline and revenue. And let's have a more high level financial view of overall marketing ROI as a business. So we start to introduce these other measures and we start to show them why they matter and how we can integrate that into the reporting. But we're not blowing up last touch attribution right away, right? And hey, if we have to game the system for a temporary period of time to boost some metrics, and Everyone can do that, right? We all know how that game is played. And if I'm doing that in service of a greater mission in order to make the change needed, but build the credibility and trust along the way, I'm okay with that, right? So it's not this idealistic, like, I'm only going to do it this way. We're going to rip off the Band-Aid. You just have to trust me. It's just not how most businesses operate. And so just acknowledge the reality that you're in, play the game as it is being played today, find your in, and then when the time is right, you strike, right? And when you start to build all of these other views of measurement and start to get that buy-in with your point of contact, with their boss, with other C-team folks, with the board, you begin reporting on both of them. And then people come to the conclusion on their own about the limitations of a measurement model like last touch attribution, and you can start to move people in that direction. Honestly, it's like the only way that I've seen it work.
I love that. I did a lot of change management in my big corp days, and I wish I had that clarity of thought back then. I tried to bulldoze my way through everything that I thought wasn't working properly. Didn't really work very well, I have to say. I didn't gain a lot of friends either. But I find again a lot of similarities between that and what we're going through in trying to create almost a category from scratch. You don't create a category from scratch and then try and shove it down everyone's throats. You have to first put a product in market that solves a real pain. And you evolve as needs evolve, as pool tells you to evolve as well. So we decided we could have gone two ways. We could have built what we think will be the marketing operating system in 2-3 years' time. And we could have built that and tried to put it in market as soon as possible. Or we could have done what we did, which is build a product that will transform into the marketing operating system that we believe is the future. But the journey from point A to point B will be led by the market and our customers. We will fill the pool and we will release accordingly, right? And that is it's a much better way to build and a much better way to grow as well. Now, I have one question for you, which I've been dying to ask you, which everyone asks me when I'm a guest in their podcast. And I think you'll have a much better answer than I do, which is about marketing skills for marketers. Like we have a group of 100 and something marketing leaders on our WhatsApp, and everyone is also always asking the same thing, which is, what are the skills that marketers should be focusing on right now or building up right now? Do you have an answer for that?
Yeah, definitely. So I think I would say probably I have 3 core skills that come top of mind. So I think one is I would kind of bucket under understand your buyer. So whether that's like understanding just basic methodologies of like research or surveying, or like I think what a lot of founder or entrepreneurs can often do, just like have a bunch of calls with your prospects and start like pattern recognition and pattern matching, right? Like you need to be able to understand your customer and the market. That's crucial. I think that like the understanding of markets has essentially been completely removed from most B2B SaaS marketing roles today. It has become like more, oh, you have to be a GTM engineer or you have to do this and that. And it's like the actual original purpose of a marketer was like understanding like the dimensions of the market and how to position the company within the market to drive an economic outcome. Like that's the true role of a marketer. So I think that's so important. And markets are going to go through dramatic changes. So being able to be able to build the skills to like understand the current state of the market and where it's going is critical for success. And that is applicable to any company that you decide to go to. I think the next one is, how are you able to use data to tell a compelling story or narrative? And so this is a tricky one because there's a lot of ways to manipulate data to prop up a false narrative and a false story. There's also a lot of ways to manipulate data to just back up whatever your original position was. But to be able to objectively look at data, objectively assess what the data is showing you, and put together a data-backed narrative that is focusing on like in a very important business decision. I mean, that's honestly, that's why a lot of people hire us at Refine Labs. So that's crucial in my opinion. Then the third thing is, I'll throw AI in here. There is an element of, yes, needing to remain current with the set of tools out there and understanding what is noise and what is useful. So I think if I was earlier in my career as a marketer, those would be the three things that I would be obsessing over. And I think if you're good at those three things, then you will thrive in the AI era.
I agree. I'm just going to add a fourth one, which I think, but by the way, I thank you.
Yeah.
I completely agree with those three. The fourth one I always add is I feel like we're going to witness a comeback to the 1970s marketer without the whiskey and the sexism, hopefully, but the kind of madman, big kind of creative idea marketer. I feel like it's the only way that brands will be able to really lift themselves up above everyone else and get that differentiation and that distinctiveness, because AI is actually bringing the cost of content production to zero. The only way you have to get a competitive advantage is to have people who think outside the box and come back with really outrageous creative. So I think that would be what I'd be looking for in a marketer as well.
I think that's a great ad. 100% agree.
One of the things that I'm always thinking about with those kind of ideal skills is everyone tries to get the hybrid marketer, right? It's a marketer who's also in sales. As Duarte said, it's a marketer who's also in customer success. And I think in the early days and consistently with Refine Labs, with the demand strategies you've done, it's taken them closer to data and then closer to sales. Where do you think the next hybrid is going to be? Is it going to be the engineer, the GTM engineer that everyone talks about, which we have mixed feelings about? Or is it, where do you think the next hybrid is going to come from?
Where I think it will go and what I think where I think it should go, I think are going to be two different things. I think, similar to what Duarte was saying, like, I think it should go back to the original purpose of a marketer, which is more about understanding your market, owning positioning, pricing. Promotion is a big part of it, right? But essentially in B2B SaaS, marketing has been just boiled down to essentially glorified promotion as the only thing that actually matters, right? So I think that's where it should go. I think that would also encompass the creativity and the elements of like the Mad Men era that you mentioned. I think where it will go in the short term is no one's getting off this GTM engineering train. And honestly, I think the struggle that I have with this is I've actually yet to see this approach and those set of tactics make any meaningful impact to any business, right? It's almost like the use of tools for the sake of using the tool, or for the ability to say that you were sophisticated in the use of technology without any real acknowledgement of the impact to the customer or the business. And so, unfortunately, I see it going in that direction. And I think people will be prioritizing people fluent in AI tools and GTM engineering in terms of people they want to hire, and continuing to deprioritize some of these like core fundamental skills that I think are needed. But nature is harsh. I think it'll play out, and I don't think it will work, and they won't survive. And then the life is just this really funny cycle, right? And then what's old is new again. Like, so you can just kind of sit back and be the observer and just like, okay, well, if this is how it's going to play out, how can I position myself in this market to be different and to still do the right thing. Like at the end of the day, like I do what I do because I love doing what I do. Like I want to help companies succeed. I want to help my team succeed. I could make a choice to do something totally different and I can personally be fine and be successful. So my belief is even if it's not cool or not what like all the cool kids are talking about, like if I just stay true to what I believe is right, that will actually result in success for our team, our customers, and our agency.
Agreed. Nature finds a way.
Nature finds a way. And sometimes you can't tell people. Sometimes people, that's what I also learned over the course of my career. I could see people, walking right into an oncoming train. I could be like, there's a train. There's a train. Watch out for the
Not ready to
train.
hear it.
And I'm just like, they're
Yeah.
not going to hear it. So I'm just like, now I'm like, okay. I'm like, I'll have the Band-Aids ready. So when the train hits them, I can help them clean up.
I think the GTM engineer thing is a lot like the demand capture that we talked about earlier, but maybe even going to a smaller percentage of the pie. We talked about demand capture being the 5% that we're trying to capture. I feel like what GTM engineering is trying to do is trying to capture 1% or the 1% of the 1%, but really loudly. So what I see most companies doing is sharing the results in terms of how many people they've reached and how many people they've got to reply or whatever. But there's very rarely like, this is what it did in terms of revenue. And what I find really interesting to see is there's a group of companies talking about it and how great it is. And then there's the group of companies making huge ARR. The crossover of those two circles, I don't see as being very big. So when you talk to 11 Labs, when you talk to all of these companies that are going through the absolute moon right now, it seems to be that they've basically built their product to be their marketing, right? They've built something that basically advertises itself with how easy it is to share, with how much people want to talk about it, how innovative and creative and everything it is. And I think it's really great to see those successes and just to be able to stack them up next to the people saying we have to do GTM engineering as a proof point of that argument. But I'm happy to see from our listeners if there are amazing examples that they want to share of the GTM engineering success that the three of us have just completely missed out on deaf ears.
And I mean, I have to remind myself every time I hear GTM engineering that we're really talking about cold outbound, right? It's lead enrichment and cold outbound. No matter how much you package it to sound more science-based or effective, it's still a saturated channel filled with bad data, right? And it shows an industry out of ideas.
I agree completely. And the more and more people that adopt it, the less and less effective it becomes.
For sure.
Yeah. What do you guys got next for me?
So we went through a lot of questions in that time, to be honest. I was pretty impressed.
I told you I do this all the time. I'm
It's amazing.
Just crushed it. I think one thing that I would really love to do, which is a little bit different to the rest of the conversation, is to do something that's hands-on, very tactical. What we try and do in every session is go into an example that people can imagine themselves sitting in. So it could be their company. So for that, I'm imagining a B2B challenger brand comes to you. They have a decent product. They have decent pipeline, but growth is plateaued for them. They're capturing all of the hand raisers and the pipeline is drying up. Can you walk us through how you diagnose what's broken and where would you start? What would that journey look like for them? You can use it with an existing company you work with, up to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way our onboarding process is designed is essentially to run two tracks in parallel with our customers. The first track is they hire us to, for a job that needs to be done, right? So, typically that's immediately getting in and getting hands on keyboard with their ad accounts, making sure that we can go in and immediately assess what's happening, but essentially like maintain at least the performance of what they've been having to date so that doesn't slip or fall. At the same time, we know that in order to set the right strategy decisions, we need to go through a series of diagnostic steps on our side to understand the situation. And so step number one is, and we have a good process for this, but it's essentially this immersion into our client's business. All of our teams only work with 3 or 4 customers at a time, and at max in the future, that might be 5. A lot of paid media agencies, that ratio is like 8 to 10 customers per person or per account team. The reason behind this is very intentional. There's only so many companies that one person can deeply understand, right? Before you start to just get them mixed up, and you can only go sort of surface level or shallow. So that's everything from like listening to Gong sales recordings, having product demos, doing a 2-year historical analysis of all of their leads and opportunities, looking at their entire website and their kind of all of their digital properties, their content strategy. We're trying to get the full picture, understanding what are the next, 3 to 5 year goals if they have them. That allows us to say, okay, here's a current state of the situation. What is working? What is not working? What the goals are, what the projections say that we will do, and then what the gap is. There's always a gap, right? The goal is always higher than what's likely to occur. So that all of that is happening in the first 6 to 8 weeks of working together with a customer. As a result of that, we essentially end up with a 12-month strategic roadmap that's prioritized and sequenced in terms of highest impact activity to begin to actually execute that plan. So you kind of were getting to this, but a few common themes that come up in these diagnostics. Number one, often heavily indexed on demand capture, not enough demand creation. So typically that requires a reallocation of budget. It requires conversations around measurement. I was giving that example earlier in terms of how to think about introducing new measurement concepts along with the existing ones that exist at the company. It's a common approach that we take. Another really interesting thing is people will often tell us their ideal customer profile. And then when we do a win-loss analysis of their opportunities, the customers that they're winning aren't really the same as how they describe their ideal customer. And so getting really clear on like, hey, this is where you're winning. Like we can get more of this type of customer, but you think you want to get that type of customer. And you can be putting a ton of money behind targeting that is not focused on where you win, right? And it's like, hey, yes, I know you want to go up market, or I know you want to break into this new industry. And like, okay, that's fine. And we can allocate some budget to that. But you have your whole budget going to your wish list, not, what the market will, which segment of the market will buy today. The other thing is, often there is a real lack of understanding of the customer or the buyer. So something we've been doing a lot more lately, and today we're kind of integrating some partners into this, is actually doing market and buyer research. We've done this for a handful of customers, and it's actually been kind of game changing. We've actually learned like there were decisions made in the marketing strategy that were in direct conflict with how the buyer wanted to kind of discover or purchase a product. And some of this also is actually impacted relative to the sales strategy versus the marketing strategy. I can give you one example. We had this one customer where the buyer essentially wanted a subject matter expert involved in the sales process for an initial proof of concept in order to make a big switch from kind of the incumbent provider to this new solution that was being offered. And being able to actually market against that because no other competitors in the space were doing that, and then amending their sales process had a massive impact on win rates. And again, that's, from the customer experience, they're feeling that the most probably in the sales process, but we were able to bring that through the market research that we did, and then also lean into that in terms of how we were messaging any digital marketing campaign, right? To set the expectation that we understand them, we understand the high stakes of this decision, and that we are making it easy for them to say yes because of how we can move them through their buying process. And so that's just one example, but you do these market research initiatives. And honestly, if you get like 1 or 2 insights like that, that's all you need to have a massive positive trajectory on outcomes. And then the other piece is, I think, a lot of people will have their ideal customer profile mapped out, but then just say, oh, we need to advertise on Google and LinkedIn, because every B2B company advertises on Google and LinkedIn. And what I always tell customers is you have to start with your audience. Where is your audience? Your audience might not be on Google or LinkedIn. If you're creating a new category, it might be difficult for search to work for you, right? If you're selling into a really interesting ICP, like they might be on Meta, not on LinkedIn. And so also like really having like research and data backed channel recommendations and budget allocation. A lot of times with paid, they're just like, oh, we're just going to do we're going to spend on the channels that everybody else spends on without thinking about where their audience is. I could probably go on and on, but those are some good examples for you.
Megan, this was amazing. It was a real career highlight for me, I have to say. I've been wanting to discuss all these things with you for a very long time. So the podcast is a good excuse to do it. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you in. And yeah, speak soon.
Thanks for having me. See you in New York next time you come visit.
That's a deal.
If you have a guest in mind that you think we should be interviewing, if you have a topic you think we should be doing an episode about, please reach out on LinkedIn and let me know.